Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. And what I want to talk about in this video is related to the subject of the final legendary lord of Lords of the End Times. Now, there's been various leaks and speculation on the subject of which legendary lords we're going to get. We've had Nagash, Neferata, and Boris Todbringer officially announced, and we are extremely likely to get Tankwell as well. So that just leaves one legendary lord for Creative Assembly to do. Now, there's been leaks. Some older leaks suggest that they would have wanted to do Valten instead as the legendary lord for the Empire as opposed to Boris, and Boris was supposed to be the free one. Then they changed that around and they're going to do Valten later on. But the big question is with regards to a Chaos Legendary Lord, because it would be weird if Lords of the End Times did not have one Legendary Lord of Chaos. And based on the recent leaks that came out on Reddit, that was posted on an official forum apparently, it is going to be Moonclaw. Now, an older leak suggested Glotkin. So I want to talk about the pros and cons of both approaches. I think from the perspective of the Beastmen, you get the benefit if they are going to do Moonclaw, that they could put Moonclaw wherever they wanted to without messing around with the map too much. To be certain, when we think about a Beastman campaign, it would impact someone, but let's say, they put him in Talabayam, for instance, or somewhere around in the Empire, or maybe even in Bretonia if they wanted to, but let's assume somewhere in the Empire. Talabayam seems like a good location where they could use that. Certainly would screw over Karl Franz a bit in his campaign, but then again, we already have to deal with Kazrak, and that doesn't have that as much impact. Moonclaw would make sense from a lore perspective. He would be the last major Beastman character. Now, why exactly would they do Moonclaw? Well, what the leak suggested is that Games Workshop wants them to do Moonclaw because of a marketing situation in regards to the old world tabletop. Now, I haven't been paying attention to what Games Workshop has been doing with regards to the old world, if they have Beastman content coming out there, so feel free to correct me if they are or not on the subject. But if it is the case, then I think it makes sense. Certainly the way Games Workshop views Total War Warhammer is as part of a marketing tool for their tabletop games. That's how they view the video games in general. They want the video games to sell stuff on the tabletop. And Beastmen especially could definitely use a rework from my perspective. That would improve their campaigns, improve their legendary lords, give them unique mechanics. As it currently stands, only Tarax has unique mechanics, and even from that perspective, he could definitely use an improvement in his starting situation, in his starting campaign. I'm not quite sure exactly where he has vanished to anyway. Well, he has Clark Harand. It would be a good opportunity for Creative Assembly to actually improve the Beastman AI as well. And they've talked about campaign AI prioritization as a thing that they're going to do for patch 8.1. On top of that, beyond the legendary lords themselves, we could also talk about the race as a whole and how it functions. The research tree of the Beastmen is very lackluster and could use some genuine improvement to put it up to the standards of other races. Yes, Beastmen were reworked at the end of Warhammer 2. It's been quite a few years since the end of Warhammer 2, and so I think it would stand to reason for them to update the Beastmen from that perspective, from the research tree perspective. Furthermore, they only start with one army, and it takes them quite a good amount of time, or not necessarily a good amount of time, but it is kind of a hassle to get a secondary army unlocked. And the way their mechanics function is you're kind of pushed in this perspective of wanting to just go around screwing over people. I mean, that makes sense from a Beastman standpoint, but it would be nice if it wasn't just so much of a case. It's like, let's run around or either throw ourselves into direct battles in order to win against our opponents and build up those hurtstones in order to just get another army. Having a secondary army that you would start with would go a long way towards improving the campaign. Also, we could talk about how the current campaign dynamic, the current map, doesn't necessarily favor them, and how the Hearthstone mechanic, the way certain settlements are counted towards the Hearthstone and others are not, is a bit ridiculous. Like, for instance, I put a Hearthstone over there in the forest. Why exactly is Wrecker's Point not part of that? It is just a bit of a weird one to really consider. And I think that's where Creative Assembly could really do some genuine improvement with regards to the game and how it functions. It would certainly benefit Kazrak's campaign if they updated the Beastmen. It would benefit many other campaigns. Also, on top of that situation, it would really be good if they updated the way Dread works. Having a single resource that is utilized for every single thing in a Beastman campaign does get tiring. It just pushes you towards using all that dread, saving it up, getting Legendary Lord Confederations if you own the other DLCs. Like, let's say if you own Taurox, you can only play Taurox, but if you own the Beastman pack, you can confederate all the others, except Taurox, of course. But you can basically, let's say, get two others if you're playing as Kazrak, Alagor, or Mogr. And it's kind of an incentive to do that because it's going to benefit you a significant amount, or improving hero capacity even if you're not interested at. Although getting legendary lords, getting their confederation and their horde armies as a result of that, which they probably are going to build up to some extent, is a far stronger incentive structure than anything else. Then you also have the Hearthstone upgrades, or increasing the level of horde armies, encampments, as well as increasing lord and hero recruit rank all the way up to level 15. That is a ridiculous benefit, but it just means that all these awesome units that Beastmen do have kind of get left in the dust in comparison to other things that you could utilize in a campaign. I mean, even with the units, what's the point when Minotaurs and Sangors to some extent and Regiments Renowned can get you a very, very long way in a campaign? You're kind of incentivized to actually unlock units, get one of each type, because you will get them, get the recruitment for that. But due to the limitation of armies, you're rarely given a reason to actually use more, to actually increase that unit capacity by quite a bit. And there's also a balance problem, an inverted difficulty problem, whereby Beastmen later on in the campaign become ridiculously strong and just steamroll everything without a care in the world. Having a campaign structure where it just works on the basis of starting slow and then build it up to immense strength, that where you no longer have to care about many things, is not really an ideal campaign structure, I think. I understand the game is right now played very aggressively, and certainly the Beastmen do work from that perspective. We could also talk about the limitations on diplomacy. Warhammer 3 has a lot of diplomatic tricks that the Beastmen just don't utilize. I think with regards to Disorder factions and Chaos factions, like, Greenskins in particular, I think it would make sense if Greenskins and Beastmen could have some dealings, though I'm not quite sure about that. Obviously, you have diplomatic relations with Chaos factions, but even then, due to the mechanics of the race, it ends up creating a lot of limitations. And then you also have to talk about sieges and how Creative Assembly wants to approach said sieges. Those are all reasons why I think that doing the Beastmen as the final race, so to speak, of Lords and End Times would make a lot of sense for Creative Assembly. We don't know if they will. Keep in mind, it's just a leak. And I would be really interested in seeing how Moonclaw is done. Bear in mind, Moonclaw has been mentioned in multiple leaks, not just the one that recently came out, which may or may not be true. But whether or not they do him in Lords and End Times remains to be seen. Again, I think it makes sense. I think there's a lot of reasons and there's a lot of benefits to the race as a whole if they were to do Moonclaw. But I suppose we will just have to find out how things end up unfolding. Of course, the alternative to it, and the most logical one from my personal perspective, would be Glotkin. See, Glottkin played a fairly important role in the fall of Altdorf in Lords of the End Time, so having them as a legendary lord for Nurgle would make sense, or for Chaos. The older leak, the one that got a lot of things right about Tides of Torment, indicated that Glottkin would be coming for Chaos, though what exactly that means. Would it be Demons of Chaos, and they would rework that entire situation with Daniel, put maybe Be'lakor as part of that race, and make that an actual workable undivided Demons of Chaos race as opposed to what we have right now? Or would it be part of Nurgle? Obviously, having Glotkin as part of Nurgle would be a fairly sensical approach, all things considered, given their specific lore. But that might not end up happening in Lords of the End Times, and Creative Assembly might be doing them as part of a character pack. If the leaks are to be believed, they're going to be doing 2 character packs and 1 major DLC a year from now on. Whether or not that means we get the 2nd character pack this year remains to be seen, or maybe early next year. Again, speculation, all kinds of discussion on the subject, though I would not necessarily read too much in the specific timelines of that. By either way, Glotkin would make a huge amount of sense in Lords of the End Times from my view, and it would help make Nurgle a much better race than it currently is. The problems of Nurgle have to do with all kinds of issues with regards to recruitment and buildings and heroes and campaign mechanics if we look at them. Unit recruitment is very limited and very expensive early on unless you're recruiting in a province with very high level of Nurgle corruption. You can reduce the recruitment cost by a significant amount, and you can recruit a huge number of units globally if you want to, so you do have that long-term capability in a campaign. That the game currently does not work like that and doesn't favor that specific approach is its own discussion, but certainly Nurgle would fit the mold from that perspective of how they work versus how the game works at the moment. It would be better if Creative Assembly improved things in terms of how Nurgle does end up handling in a campaign. So specifically, the fact that we use infections for our main military recruitment buildings as well as for plagues creates a choice. You either focus on plagues, which are generally speaking not going to be worth all that much in a campaign, and certainly not to the extent that they want us to focus on plagues with regards to Epidemius and Tamarkand. For Tamarkand, it's really a question of leveling Cask as opposed to maintaining the plagues. For Epidemius, it's about his faction effects or his unique effect as a legendary lord faction. But suffice to say, usually focusing on plagues is not really that great. Though focusing on unit recruitment in itself kind of ends up feeling a bit secondary because you can just get a lot of hero recruitment from different structures over here because you can build regular structures with a decent amount of money to be sure, but you can acquire a good number of heroes. And with those number of heroes, the increased capacity, all of them, at tier 3 from 2 different structures, you can just make Nurgle a hero race that you're playing with. And I think whenever you force any player to just go down the route of going just using heroes is not really a great decision process from Creative Assembly in terms of racial design. And that's why I think Creative Assembly should change with respect to Nurgle. Furthermore, infections are limited in terms of how many you get them. And the best way of getting them really is through battle. This is the reason why actually Festus is the best Nurgle campaign from the perspective of actually using plagues. Or we could actually consider Lord Stroke and the super plague that he has in his campaign, the benefits he gets from that, because Skaven plagues are fairly damn nasty to actually utilize. But it goes further because you also need 200 infections and 400 infections to unlock certain research over here in the Nurgle tree, or even 600 infections to unlock it. Some of these things are obviously very powerful. Some of these things, not necessarily so much. It's more of a gatekeeper mechanic with regards to certain bits of research right here. that can be useful in a campaign. Specifically, fattening seeds. Like Contagious Horde is not really worth it all that much, but fattening seeds, which gives you a population surplus +1 for newly captured settlements, definitely is. And that is where I think Creative Assembly should reconsider how they ultimately ended up doing the research tree for Nurgle, just updating certain things. But really, the infections mechanic, I would say, is the core issue for Nurgle at the moment, and where they should really improve things. And the way buildings are constructed themselves, like, I understand having a cycle of 4 turns for a building, but I do not believe it should take 4 turns to construct a basic military barracks. It might take 4 turns or 2 turns, let's say, to get the basic units. But then again, consider this with regards to it. Getting a unit of Forsaken into Marauders of Nurgle is not going to be a game changer situation for any single Nurgle campaign. A bigger problem for Nurgle, and one of the much, much bigger issues, is that their climate situation looks pretty damn good until you understand one thing. They all struggle with mountain climate. This wouldn't be a game-breaking issue, with the exception that everyone except to some extent, and only to some extent, Epidemius, but everyone, Tamarkan and Kugaf especially, have to deal with a good amount of mountain climate. So that further limits their campaign, because their basic buildings are expensive, and so or their basic buildings require quite a lot of infections and take a long time to construct. So when you also add climate problems on top of that, it becomes something of a nightmare. There's also all kinds of things about resource buildings and how those should work. I mean, I think my general perspective is that the best resource building handling was with Omens of Destruction. Sure, what they did for Thrones of Decay was a step in the right direction, but I kind of wish they had gone further with Tides of Torment and they had developed more content as well for Tides of Torment compared to what they did. But those would be my reasons for why I think Nurgle should certainly be updated, though whether or not they do so as part of a character pack or they decide to do so with the release of the Lords of End Times remains to be seen. Keep in mind something about leaks. They're always subject to change. There's still several months until the DLC comes out, though at this point they probably have already decided what kind of content it's going to contain. I guess we're going to find out exactly where it's going to end up going. Is it going to be Moonclaw? Is it going to be Glotkin? Let me know what you guys think is the most likely scenario. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and I'll see you boys and girls on the next one.